Welcome to Connect's Conference 2021 Day 2, brought to you by Huawei.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another session at the Connect Conference 2021. Thank you for joining us, and we hope that you are finding the content valuable and that you have enjoyed it so far. As always, again, we're incredibly privileged to have one of the greatest speakers on the African continent with us today, Melissa Govender from Access Partnership. Melissa, just allow me to first thank you for your time and sharing your knowledge with us as well on this platform. It's really important for the Digital Council to continuously stimulate dialogue amongst our members, to have conversations, sometimes be a bit controversial, look at things from the other side, ask the difficult questions, and find solutions that will stimulate investment in our sector. So by way of introduction, Melissa Govender is a senior manager for Access Partnership. She's based in Johannesburg, and she is a South African national. Melissa works as a senior policy manager for the African continent, and she identifies areas for collaboration within the digital economy. Her work focuses on the digital divide and how technology can be used to unlock economic opportunities and growth in Africa, and ensuring alignment with the Africa Union's Agenda 2063. But prior to Access Partnership, Melissa headed up regulatory engagements for British American Tobacco Southern Africa operations. And she spent over 5 years working in the financial sector, where she assessed prudential and market conduct regulation. She also assisted with the establishment of Standard Bank's Regulatory Advocacy Unit and pioneered the Regulatory Dialogue Series. She was trained as a diplomat, and on completion of her master's degree in international political economy from the London School of Economics, she was selected for the Development Bank of Southern Africa's Young Professional Program. She holds a BA degree in political science and media writing, which she obtained from the University of Cape Town. Welcome, Melissa. It's a real privilege to have you with us today. You and I have engaged before, and every time I spend time with you, I go away and I always feel like I've learned something. So thank you for your time and thank you for sharing your knowledge with you. And we look forward to listening to you today.
Great. Thank you so much for that introduction, Janita, and it's a pleasure to be part of the Digital Council, and I'm looking forward to working with you. So my topic today is 5G versus 4G and what is feasible for the African market. Before I start, I thought it would be great to just give an introduction of my company, Access Partnership, and who we are. So Access Partnership is a tech-based consultancy. We specialize in market intelligence. So this means if you're looking to enter a new market and you want to know what the licensing requirements are or the regulatory requirements are, we'd assist with that. We also work with strategy development, advocacy, and engagement. So this means understanding the policy landscape, what the risks are, and how to navigate that. Access Partnership has been working in the African continent for over 20 years now. We've worked very closely with the African Telecommunication Union, the ATU, where we've advised on emerging technology and regulations around that. And we've also worked with governments. So, for example, we've worked with the Nigerian government, helping them with their cloud policy and their data classification framework. Okay. All Access Partnerships engagements is underpinned by the principle of fair tech. So what does this mean? Fair tech means that the benefits of technology need to be equitably and sustainably distributed. That means that no one gets left behind and that we address the digital divide specifically. In terms of our presence, here is a map showing all of Access Partnerships offices and where we're based. Okay, so what is 5G? And now I'm starting more on my presentation. There are 3 things that distinguish 5G from 4G or 3G. What are they? Number 1 is speed. 5G is faster, smarter, and more energy efficient than 4G. It's actually 100 times faster. The other issue is obviously spectrum. So 5G uses less spectrum, but to be efficient, it needs to operate in the higher frequency bands. The other difference is obviously latency, and we were speaking about this now in our internet connection, but obviously the lower the latency is, the faster you get images to your computer or to your screen. So what does this all mean? It means we have better technology. So we have high definition videos with no buffering. We can actually have self-driving cars because they can now speak to each other in real time. And then also from an African perspective, 5G can be used to put in IoT sensors, so that's Internet of Things sensors into the ground, and it can be used to measure nutrients, temperature, and humidity. And from that, we can actually decide how to improve soil quality so that we get good crop yields. So 5G definitely has the ability to transform the digital economy, and it will fundamentally do that. Very briefly on spectrum bands, because it is relevant to 5G. So let's perhaps start with what is a spectrum band. So spectrum is invisible radio frequencies that wireless signals travel over. And when we speak about spectrum, we speak about 3 band types. There's a high band, a mid band, and a low band. So with a high band, the frequencies are closer together, and this band is great for carrying big data, but it also struggles to actually penetrate buildings. Mid-band, our frequency bands are a bit further apart, and there's less of an issue with buildings here. And then with a low band, obviously the frequency bands are further apart, and this goes for a longer distance, and there's less of an issue once again with building penetration. For 5G to work, it needs to be in the high band. So the industry norm is the 3.5 gigahertz range and above. And so we need to consider this when we're talking about 5G. So what are the challenges with 5G adoption? So according to the GMSA, yes, it is the 5G era and it has begun in sub-Saharan Africa, but 3G will remain the dominant technology for the foreseeable future. So why is this? So we're talking about 5G, but what about 4G? So some markets in Africa have already started rolling out 4G. But this is not necessarily translated into widespread 4G adoption. So the ITU actually released some data on Sunday, I think it was, called the State of Broadband 2021. And even according to their best estimates, by 2026, most Africans will still be using 3G and 4G, 3G and 2G, sorry. So why is the uptake so low? Let's discuss then and delve into that a little bit further. Well, we all know this, especially in South Africa, but sub-Saharan Africa actually has the world's most expensive data prices. So access to data means that most Africans cannot actually access 4G. Another issue is the price of devices. So we found some data which says that actually to buy a very simple 4G device, it costs almost 60% of your average monthly income. So this makes it very unaffordable. And also, if you look at the prices between a 2G, which can start at about USD $8, to a 4G smartphone, which is USD $40, we understand that gap a little bit more. There's also the issue of usability. So digital service uptake has not been great in the African continent. There are many reasons for this. We have low digital literacy. There's digital skills, which is a challenge. Access to electricity, so even charging phones sometimes becomes problematic. And then there's not enough locally available content in local languages. So uptake on the whole hasn't been great. Also, adapting to 5G is costly for mobile operators. So when we were talking about the frequencies, we said that with 5G, your frequencies are closer together. This means that you need more cell phone masts. It also means that you need 4 new 5G antennas to help with the signal transmission. So while some mobile operators are actually upgrading their networks for 2G, 3G, and 4G, 5G actually works on a completely different network, so they can't piggyback off these upgrades. So it does become very costly. And then, of course, there's the issue of spectrum, which I discussed very briefly. But for 5G to work, it actually needs frequencies in the mid and high frequency bands. And there's limited availability of that in most African countries. So I'll use the example of South Africa here. In South Africa, Vodacom and MTN were able to extend 5G because of the emergency spectrum that ICASA had extended. And this was due to the COVID-19 pandemic, where we had more people working from home. ICAST have subsequently withdrawn the use of the temporary spectrum, and this has obviously negatively impacted 5G for both Vodacom and MTN. So what are then the challenges with 5G adoption from a rural connectivity perspective? And this is really relevant to the African continent. We need to remember that 60% of Africans live in rural areas. The business model for 5G doesn't work in rural areas where you have low income, you have low population densities, and you have a lack of resources and supportive infrastructure. So while urbanization is happening, and the best estimates say by 2050, 55% of Africans will live in urban areas. In the near future, uptake will still be very low of 5G. So according to the GMSA, by 2025, only 3% of Africans will be using 5G. So from a rural connectivity perspective, 5G is not the answer. I came across this really interesting case study while researching rural connectivity, and it's called the Zenzaneni Network. Now, Zenzaneni Network operates in a community called Mankosi, which is in the Eastern Cape province of South Africa. It's home to about 6,000 people. Most of these people don't have electricity, so they're off-grid, and they also spend 22% of their income on telecommunications. So the Zenzaneni Network is an internet service provider that is owned and run by the community, and they also sell voice and data to community members. Any phone, a mid-range phone, can actually then access their Wi-Fi enabled network. So for me, this was a great example of a community which is addressing their own rural connectivity needs. Also hats off to ICASA, who's extended them with the permission to run this community network. And at the African Telecommunications Union, when rural connectivity is discussed, the Zenzaneni network is actually used as a case study of rural connectivity and what can be done. So I definitely think in South Africa, we're kind of spearheading and trailblazing in terms of rural connectivity. So, in conclusion, yes, provide 5G to urban areas where there's a business case study, but Africa's connectivity narrative cannot and should not be dominated by 5G. The focus should be on improving our current broadband, improving the uptake of 3G and 4G in Africa. I think affordability is a big challenge for us. We need to look at how to make data more affordable across 2G, 3G, and 4G. And also we need to look at how we can make mobile devices affordable as well. Obviously, spectrum needs to be efficient, and allocation of spectrum needs to be re-looked at. And I think we need to focus on rural connectivity. So we need to encourage more community networks like the Zenzaneni ISP. And that is it for me.
Thank you, Melissa. That's a really great conversation, and you're making really good points, on the adoption of 5G. I'm wondering what your sort of take is. There's also like a lot of arguments, sort of pro the 5G economy. People that are sort of saying, what we need the investment. There's a potential for job creation in the 5G economy. For me, this is always this conversation that we've got, and we know this. I mean, in Africa, we've got this incredible sort of digital divide. Do you think that operators should still focus maybe on deploying 5G in the areas that can afford it, or do you think that would exacerbate the digital divide as we know it?
I think for urban areas, 5G makes complete sense. If you take a metropolitan area like Johannesburg, for example, where people can afford 5G, number one, and of course, being able to use it just from a traffic perspective or, using apps and different technology that is coming around that, and even smart cities, I think that makes sense. So I think 5G should happen and it should be promoted, but I think that the conversation should also focus on other areas where 5G doesn't make sense and how we can enhance connectivity in those. So definitely I'm for 5G, but I just don't think it shouldn't be the narrative that dominates all of our conversations.
I agree with you 100%. And then, I'm just sort of thinking, I'm a big advocate and, for the I call it the trilemma that we focus on, that we face in the digital divide, you know. So and I was so relieved when you pointed that out just now, because for a lot of people, the digital divide, you know, we focus on connectivity, or we focus on content. And I've always said that, you know, this is not a single conversation. There's also, you know, the big conversation of devices that we're not having, and we're not looking at how do we overcome access to devices, and you know, and what are the opportunities. Do you think that there really is, and a lot of people are pushing for it, really is an opportunity for a local manufacturer to come out and do something? Or do you think that we will always rely on the cheaper imports from, you know, globally? Or
Yeah, so I mean, the data shows that most of the imports come from China, and that's what's affordable. And then when you look at duties, that's when it actually becomes unaffordable, and also the currency fluctuations that we have. Um, I know in Rwanda there is a company called Mara Phones, which has now produced the first African smartphone. And I think that that is great, and it's pioneering in terms of creating that technology and that skill set here. And I think I'm not sure about how widely it's been adopted and how accessible it is from a price perspective, but I definitely think there's more scope for African and South African government to look at manufacturing locally. I think it aligns with our fourth industrial revolution narrative that we're trying to implement. And I think, yeah, it's a good point. When I looked at the price disparities between 2G and 4G, it is significant. And I think if it can be more affordable, that would help with uptake.
And then, of course, there's also the big conversation around, you know, what is it that which of the you know, economies do we think, or the sectors or industries, or, you know, whatever you want to term it, is most set to benefit from the 5G economy. In your opinion, is there like a clear winner, somebody that, you know, is set, is it agri-tech or fintech that is set to be the clear winner that I think that stands out head and shoulders, or do you think it's going to, you know, and which one is it, and that you think would win this race?
I think that's a hard one, Janita. I think that everyone benefits, for example, with 5G. For me, I think, yes, agri-tech is really interesting. I think fintech works really well in Africa. It's one of the industries and sectors which has experienced phenomenal growth. And I think even on a 3G and a 4G signal, it works quite well. But for me, I think what I'm most interested with 5G is from an educational perspective. You know, we're looking at teaching people remotely, teaching people in different languages. And if you have low latency and people can watch something in real life and real time and also train around that, I think the education and edtech sector is probably one of the most exciting looking at 5G. And then, yeah, I think agriculture, definitely. We're always looking at how we can improve, especially in Africa, where most economies rely on agriculture, how we can use technology to enhance and to make it more effective. So the one, you know, using sensors to look at soil, for example, soil quality and how it can be improved, that's really exciting, and that can be a game changer. So I'd say education and probably agriculture is one of the most exciting for me personally.
Yeah. I think, and you know, it's always like interesting for me because we spoke about, you touched on autonomous driving, and you know, people always think that it's very far-fetched, and I always say to them, you know, does your car have a speedo cruise? Because that's step one in autonomous driving. You know, when you on the highway, you set it up, and you know, we don't even think about that anymore, but this is sort of just the very first step in that. But in closing, so let me ask you, you know, a final comment. You know, I'm really passionate about education, and I really believe that education, you know, unlocks opportunities. And do you think that there's a policy and a regulatory environment that needs adjusting? Do you think that our educational system has kept pace? And what do you think is it that if you think it hasn't, what is it that you think that we need to do to make sure that you know, children from all over are sort of given an equal opportunity to understand tech and participate in this economy?
Yeah, so I think digital literacy is very important, and I think I can see it emerging more as an area of interest for stakeholders from a government and a private sector as well. How do we enhance digital literacy skills? In terms of government policy, I did remember when the cloud and data policy came out, there was a strong component there of skills. And how do we empower local South Africans to be able to understand this technology, but also implement it and be innovative in how we use, for example, data. And so I think the government is trying to drive that. I know it's definitely there in policy, but from a practical perspective, has it been implemented? To my understanding, I think there's probably areas for improvement there. I know there's pocket of excellences. So I did read an example where a school was using iPads to do very basic programming with children and teaching them how to, just what that means and how it's happening. But I don't think that's been done wide scale. And then, Janita, it's the issue we have that we're still a developing country. Some schools don't even have water and electricity. Is it far-fetched perhaps to be talking about, training people in terms of in terms of programming, and these are the dynamics that are challenging. But I definitely think it is a priority area, and I think for the private sector, who is playing a key role in some of these initiatives, we need to perhaps enhance that.
I think that there's a lot of pockets of initiatives, and I always say that, if I had more capacity, I'd spend some time to just try and pull it together so we can see what we're doing. And I think the other thing is that, we need to sort of understand the impact, that we have, and then of course on the youth as well. If we can enable the youth to fully capitalize on the digital economy, to understand the potential of the digital economy, and to remotely apply for jobs, then that would be then we would have done our jobs. Then you and I'm hoping, can retire with a clean conscience that we've done our part for our society and our beautiful continent that we are so privileged to live on and call home. Melissa, thank you very much for joining us today, and for sharing, your knowledge and your experience with us in this session. And thank you for Access Partnership, for just also supporting the event and being so excited about it, and this conversation that we're having, and being really committed to the digital divide, to having conversations about the digital divide, and overcoming it, and finding ways that we can create a more inclusive society so that everybody can equally benefit from it. But thank you very much for your time and sharing your knowledge with us, and to everybody at Access Partnership, a big thumbs up from our side.
Thank you to you, Janita, and to Digital Council. It's happy to be on this platform. Thank you for allowing us to have the conversation. I think it's relevant, and I think you have amazing stakeholders. I think let's look at how we can work together to address some of these challenges.
We shall do so. Thank you very much.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Ladies and gentlemen, we trust you enjoyed the session. Thank you to all our sponsors and partners for helping us bring this event to you. Please click on the next link to join the following session.